Hello, welcome back to Dawn's Tailor Made. Book pillows. Some of you may remember this film. I may be showing my age. This is the first Trolls film, but I remember these guys the first time round. I wonder if you do too. So a book pillow, what is it? So a book pillow is somewhere you can keep your book, keep it safe on your bed or on your sofa, ready to read your book when you want to. But what you can do is you can prop your book on top of your pillow and place your pillow on your knees, and it gives you a comfy place to read. Or you pop your pillow behind your back and then you place your book on your knees. You can also, if you add a string to the top, you can carry your book up and down the stairs or wherever you wanted to go. Personally, I've stopped adding these because my boy never ever carried his around. It just went on his bed and stayed on his bed. So let's see what size fabric we need. So the pillow that I'm using, I will measure it at the end for you, just so that you can gauge the right size. Let's just make sure that all goes on. So we are looking at a 15 centimetre square, okay? Now the envelope piece that we make doesn't need to be 15 inches, sorry, 15 inches, not 15 centimetres, 15 inches. So I cut my bottom piece and my top piece the same because it just makes it easier when I'm cutting out the fabric. As I said, I want to speed up your makes for you. Okay, so that's 15 inches by 15 inches. And what you do is, this is your bottom piece. We then sew a hem on the back of our envelope. So our envelope for this version goes on the top, and then you put your piece that you want to add. So the book will be sliding in there, and this piece is 15 inches across, obviously because it's the same, and then it is 10 inches long. But I have already folded down a 1 inch seam allowance. So I folded down half an inch again, okay, and then I'm going to top stitch across there, and then also with the bottom of the envelope I have folded up a 2 inch seam allowance, so 1 inch and then 1 inch, okay, so it's 2 inches from the bottom. Makes it easier to put the cushion in, or the pillow in. It depends where you are as to whether you call it a pillow or a cushion or a sham. Some people call it a sham. So we're going to sewing a seam here, okay, sewing a seam here, and then we will be attaching it together using our French seams. So let's bring in the machine. I'm just going to tilt you down a little bit, hope you don't mind. There we go. So I'm going to do the top stitching on the front of my cushion first, okay? So as I've said, that's half an inch and half an inch again. So when I line my fabric up, I'm going to line it up with the edge of my foot, going right to the end, and then I'm going to move my stitch over to my second stitch so that I am just catching that hem that is underneath there, okay? And because it's top stitching, I'm going to increase my stitch by 2 on both the top and the bottom, so your width and your length, okay? So holding up, if you remember our tip, holding up our threads for our first stitch so that it doesn't disappear, and then sewing forwards. Now keep these stitches as straight as you can. That's why I'm saying to use your mark with your fabric on the edge of your foot, because that way, that's the straightest way that you can keep your stitch. You can see that my seam has unfolded itself under there. So keep your top stitching as straight as you can by placing your foot on the edge of your fabric, and just so slowly. And then back stitch at the end. And then you should have some very neat top stitching going all the way along. Now I used grey because I wanted it to not be hidden, but I didn't want it to be showing. I didn't want to use a bright red to make it a feature. Now I'm sewing now on the folded side, so this isn't the seam, this is the seam side, not the right side, okay, just so I can gauge where I need to place my foot. And this time I am placing the other edge, the other side of my foot, on this seam, not on this side, okay, and this is going to help me to keep my seam straight. Put it there and then you will hopefully be able to see. So holding up my threads, and oh, I don't know, default back to your normal stitch, okay, because we no longer need the top stitching. So I'll just pull that out, reposition, so we no longer need the top stitching now. Okay, so I'm going to use my second stitch. It's going to take my needle over, needle down, and then back stitch, and that will make sure that you've enclosed the folded piece of your seam underneath and it's not going to come out. And then just keeping that foot right against that fabric all the way down, and it's just the easiest way to make sure that your seam is straight. Other than drawing, you can draw your sewing lines in if you want to. We have featured that in the video before. And if you draw your sewing lines in, if you're a beginner and you're struggling to keep straight, just draw in the seam lines that you want. And just going slowly all the way to the end, and make sure that you've caught that double fold hem. This will be, not a seam, I apologise, hem underneath. The seam is joining two pieces and a hem is some type of fold. So we now have our second layer of stitching. Now I'm going to move the camera over a little bit again, just so you can see me layering up this sandwich. Okay, I can see everyone saying good morning to everyone. Morning all. Let's turn that round. So this is our bottom piece. Okay, let me move that over. There we go. So this is the bottom piece of our envelope. Okay, can you see that? There we go. And then we're going to place the other part of our envelope on the top. So this is wrong sides together, and this is the hem that we've just sewn. I'm going to place that on the top, matching up the top corners. Now you can pin that if you want to, just to make sure that it isn't going to go anywhere. Okay, and then we go back to the bottom, smoothing that down, and then we're going to match up the other piece. So this is the front of our envelope cushion, okay, and we're going to match up the bottoms. Okay, so you've covered up this fold here, you've got your hem from the top, and this is our, I didn't say I interface this bit just to make it a little bit sturdier for when the book goes in, and then you'd match up your bottom and side seams, and you can pop another pin in there if you want to. Now the reason that this comes together so quickly is because we are going to use a French seam. Now, if you haven't used a French seam before, let me explain. So we are sewing everything on the front. Normally you would sew it on the back and then you would turn everything inside out, but we're not going to. We're going to use a narrow hem, a narrow seam all the way along here, all the way around the outside, okay, and then we are going to turn it inside out, sew over the top, and that will encase all of our seams. So if it seems a bit strange, you've not done this before, do not worry. So I'm going to use a 3/8 seam allowance, okay, which you can see on my machine is just about my foot width, okay. So I'm going to start here where it is going to have the most, there's two places it's going to have some tension. Just go back to my default setting. The two places it's going to have tension is where this part of the envelope is and where the second part of the envelope is inside. So when you're sewing those, make sure that you go over them twice. Okay, so needle down, back stitch, and I'm just going to sew slowly forwards making sure that I've caught all of that seam. I'm going to go past where I did my top stitching, and then I'm going to back stitch. Because when this pillow comes in and out, it's not going to come in and out often, but when it does come in and out, there we go, and then I'm going to speed up and go all the way down. When it does come in and out, there is going to be a lot of pressure on that seam, okay? And we're just going to sew down to our corners. We're going to stop with our needle down and we're going to turn. I'm hoping this method is going to speed up your batch sewing, because if you're making 5 or 6 of these for people in your lives, you're not going to be wanting to take 2 hours on each cushion. So hopefully, for me, what tends to take the longest time is cutting out the fabric. It takes a little bit longer when I'm demonstrating to you guys because I'm stopping to explain things. But if I was batch sewing these, I would sew all of those hems down that we did. So the hem on the top of my front fabric and the hem on the back of that pillow, the envelope pillow part. Do you call it a pillow or do you call it a cushion? When I've been reading different sewing chats and watching different YouTube videos, just smoothing down my fabric, it's kind of split 50-50 whether it's a book pillow or a book cushion. So stopping with my needle down and then just lining up again so I've got that small seam allowance ready for our French seam. Now I'm just going to go, I didn't go back over on the other side, I need to remember to go back and do that. So that's where the other seam is underneath there, okay? Just make sure everything is smoothed down. But by doing a French seam on here, because we're going to be doing a second row of stitching in a moment when we do the French seam part, it will give you another row of stitches that is going to make sure that this isn't going to come apart. I'm just going to back stitch over the envelope part and then sew back up to the top. If you wanted to add a little string or a ribbon or something at the top to carry your cushion, then you could add it now if you wanted to, but as I said, I don't add mine anymore because I found that my boy didn't use his. Just check I've got that seam. I'm just going to sew all the way down. Long boring sewing, I'm afraid, if you're watching this live, but I still find French seams magical. It's such a neat way to finish your work and make sure that nothing is going to fray. When this does get washed, all of those edges that could fray are hidden inside the French seam. So just go to the end, with the needle down, and then turn. Matching up our fabric again, and then back down to the other part of the envelope. Now I am going to post a second video. Do you remember our bunny ears for our scrunchies? I am going to show you how to insert something here on the top of your envelope. So I've done many things. I've done Little Red Riding Hood's hood and the tail of the wolf. I've added bunny ears for books about bunnies. So for this one, because this is cars, what you could do is you could add some black wheels on here, okay? So whatever your subject is, it's a nice idea to add a feature in the top of the pocket. But I wanted to show you this simple way first. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking down that hem, ready for our French seam. Okay, so taking it down to probably 2/8 inch. Doesn't really matter as long as your next seam that you sew is going to be smaller than that. Now that one is okay on the bottom. Have another look, because sometimes, as you know, when you're sewing, your fabric grows and stretches. Now I did cut this all on the grain, so I made sure that when I pulled the fabric, that the stretch wasn't up here, that it was across. Okay, so the grain was going down. So that does make a difference when you're making these pillows, so that they don't spread out and stretch the wrong way. So I'm just tidying up the seam at the top. I think my scissors sound like they need sharpening. And now we're going to turn it inside out. Okay, so all the way so that it's completely reversed. Okay, and make sure you poke out your corners, because they will be important with the French seam part. So make sure your corners are out as far as they can. I mean, they will be hidden, they won't be seen, but it does make a difference. So pop all of your cushion, your cover inside out, and now you should have that other seam showing. Okay, smooth that down, and now you do need your iron for this. Okay, so taking your seam, making sure that your seam is on, and that's puckering under, making sure your seam is on the outside, and then ironing it down. So as I said, you would now be turning all of those inside out. You would then iron all of them together. You just need to give it a little bit of a twist, and then your seam comes out. Mine's being a little bit stubborn, so just pop your pin in, making sure that the seam is on the outside. Okay, it makes all the difference when you're doing a French seam. So you then do all your ironing, and then you do all your final sewing. And before you know it, within a few hours, you would have 5 or 6 of these all finished all at the same time, rather than going back and starting all over again. And I just find when I'm batch sewing, when I was making these to sell, it was much easier to do all my cutting first and then all my sewing. Does give you a great sense of achievement, because you'll have them all finished at the same time, and you're less likely to have a big sigh and decide that you don't want to do any more sewing for that day. So I'm just going to pull my corners out using an old sewing needle, because they're much stronger than my normal needle. So there's my corner all the way out. Okay, and then the next side. So this is why we did it 15 inches, because we have already done a 3/8 of an inch, and now we're going to do another one enclosing these seams. Okay, so instead of just one seam there, you've got 2, so you do need to allow for that in your measurements. So now we are going to take this to the machine, and hopefully you can see there is my seam is hidden in there. Okay, so what I need to make sure is when I'm sewing further than that seam is. Okay, now the guide that I use is my foot. Again, I'm going to start down here to remind me to double sew that. I'm going to place my foot on the edge, and because I cut that seam off, we should be enclosing our seam when we sew, because it is quite small in there. Okay, so back stitch, and I'm going to over sew just to make sure that that part of the envelope is going to be secure, because it will get a lot of tension when it's changed. Okay, so I'm just turning around again, making sure that I'm lining that up so that I have enclosed my seam that is at the bottom, and then just straight stitching all the way down. Now when you do turn this round the right way, if you find that you haven't enclosed, so I went a bit off there, and I'm just wondering if my seam is enclosed in there, and if it isn't, just go back and do it again. So the second row stitching, just to make sure that isn't going to come undone. And the same at the top, because that's where the other envelope part is. And by making sure that we pulled out those corners, there isn't going to be any bulk of fabric in that corner. So you should still have a smooth corner when you turn it right side out. Now when you're doing this at home, if you want to, you will be able to go much faster than I am, because you're just sewing a straight seam, you're using your foot as your guide, and you could just whiz down these seams. But if I go too fast, it gets a little bit wobbly, and then you can't hear me. And we don't want that. Or do we want that? So remember, my other seam is here, okay, so I need to over sew that part. As you can see, hopefully, this is coming together very quickly. And if you imagine, as I keep saying, if you were making lots of these, this is a quicker way, or a quick way, of getting lots of them done. And if it's your first time making one of these envelope pillows, these book pillows, hopefully I've shown you a method that you will enjoy making, because there are no raw edges, there are no seams to stick out. So, moment of truth. Turn it back round again, cutting off any threads that you find, because you don't want them to spoil what you've done. Oh, can you see? I thought that I hadn't caught that. So, just to show you what to do, we're going to go back and sew that bit straighter. I just went a little bit wonky. I was not concentrating. So, if that does happen to you, now we're going to know how to fix it. So, I'm just going to place my foot back where it was so that I'm sewing on that seam, because all it was is I didn't go down far enough. Let me just check that that's where it is. Yes, it's on this side. So needle back to match up that seam. Okay, and then I'm just going to sew forwards. I'm just going over a little bit further than what I did with that initial seam. Should now be enclosed. That was a good mistake to make, because hopefully it's going to show you what to do if it happens to you. So there you go, all gone. Now just push all of your corners out. I've got some stray threads I need to go back and take care of. Push out all 4 corners. And then give your cushion cover, should I say, a little wiggle. So I'm just going to cut off, there's quite a lot of threads there, I will go back and cut those. And I'm going to give it a press, so you can see that that was a quick way of making sure all our seams are enclosed, and our cushion cover is done. So I do need to rob the trolls of their pillow, I'm afraid. And what I do is I push, oh, I said I was going to tell you the measurements, didn't I? It's not on here. So if you pull it out, this is a 16 by 16 pillow sham, cushion, whatever it is you want to call it. Okay, so I'm going to push it down to the bottom. Okay, and then you turn it over, picking up your other piece, your other seam. Okay, and then push in the top. Not as tricky as doing a duvet, hey. And then it should all push out. Now that interfacing on there has made that really quite stiff, which is nice. When the book goes in, it's going to make sure that the bottom of the book, the feet of the book, aren't going to be sticking out. So push your sham, your cushion, into the corners and then just pull them as you would do a duvet. So push it right into the corner, hold on to it and pull it like that. This is quite an old pillow, so it's a little uneven in its softness, shall we say. And make sure that one is right down. Make sure the pillow goes right down into the corners because it will spoil your shape. Okay. And my cushion is slightly unlevel. Can you see? It's giving it a bit of a mound there. So we'll get our book. We'll pop our book in. I will move the camera up. There we go. I'll move it back so you can see. There we go. So, one memory book, pillow, book cushion, whatever it is that you guys want to call it, and your book is not going to fall out because you've got the interfacing in there. It's going to hold it nice and tight. Okay, now as I said, I will show you how you can add features to the top of here that correspond with the book. So in this book is Fantastic Mr. Fox, so I could put some fox ears on here. I think that's what I might do rather than the bunny ears. I will post later on, I will make a fox cushion, pillow, memory envelope, whatever you call it. I'll make a fox one and I'll show you how you can add ears. So this book would just have a pair of ears sticking up there, which I think is quite a nice feature. So if you do make one, and please post it. And if you find this tutorial easier than the other one, then please say, because then I'll know, how I can gauge my tutorials for the future. Okay, please show us yours and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.